There's just so much.
You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on.
Hello, it's Mum. How many times have I been doing this? From Mamamia, I'm Mia Freedman, and you're listening to No Filter. What happens when you're one of the most famous and successful authors in the world and you can't write? Like the ideas just dry up, and so do the words. You've got nothing. You sit down in bed where you usually write your books and nothing comes out through your fingers. The connection to whatever alchemy of creativity and skill and experience you've built over your whole career is just abruptly severed, and you can't do what you do. And it's not just an existential problem in your own mind. There are literally millions of people waiting for you, and many, many millions of dollars at stake, not just for you, but for publishers and booksellers all over the world. No pressure. This complete nightmare has happened to Marian Keyes 3 times. The first time was when she fell into a pit of depression that lasted for 4 years, and it nearly cost her her marriage and her life. The second time was at the start of COVID, and the third time it happened was just last year after her father died. I'll let Marian tell you what she did on each of those 3 occasions, how she got through it and around it and out of it. Because how could I ever tell a story better than the master? Do you say the mistress? That always sounds sexual. The legend of narrative. Marian is the woman who knows how to weave universal truths about what it's like to be a daughter or a sister or a friend or a wife or a girlfriend or a mother or someone who's falling in love or someone who's been brutally dumped or someone who's an addict or a success story or a fuck up or someone who feels like a fraud, even though they're really not. She mostly writes fiction, of course, books like Watermelon and Rachel's Holiday, Grown Ups, The Break, This Charming Man, and her latest novel, My Favourite Mistake. But she's also written very frankly about that period of her life when she had clinical depression. It lasted for 4 years, and it left her not just unable to write, but she couldn't sleep, she couldn't read, she couldn't even talk through large periods of it. She went to rehab for alcohol addiction when she was 30, and she still refers to herself as an alcoholic, which I found interesting. I wanted to understand that a bit better. Like, how tempting is it to reach for a drink now when things are bad, like they were during those times when she couldn't write? And how does she feel now that she's just turned 60 about how she looks? How did she let go of the bitterness and the grief that came with not being able to have children with her husband, Tony? How does she feel about how the world sees her? And more importantly, how she sees herself? Because perimenopause smashed Marian in ways that she only now is starting to understand, and so did the recent death of her father. This new book, My Favourite Mistake, is not the book she intended to write, but it's the one she needed to write, and it's the one that she thought we needed to read. Which makes it sound like homework, but it's actually the opposite of homework, because Marian writes the literary equivalent of comfort food, and that is the highest compliment I can give a book. I spoke to Marian 7 years ago on this podcast, which feels like a lifetime ago. So enjoy your hug with your best smelling friend, because I really did. Here's Marian Keyes. A lot's happened in those 7 years, and I wanted to touch on some of those things. Of course, you've released several more books. Your dad died. I'm so sorry for the loss of your beautiful dad.
It was, there are no words. I mean, we all know what's going to happen to us, and still there is no way of preparing. And the denial in me was enormous. Like, even though I was told he had 48 hours to live, I didn't believe it. I thought, he's rallied before, he'll rally again. You know, he's my dad, he's not going to die. Even though we'd sort of lost him long before because he had Alzheimer's. It was just awful. Somebody had told me that we are all given the strength to survive this. But he died at the end of 2018. The 6 months after, I couldn't think. And I was so exhausted the whole time. Like I had to sleep an awful lot and, forgot things all the time. And like 5 years on now, I've just come back from a family holiday with my mother and, he's still with us. We talk about him a lot. I mean, that's all we can do, that like he lives on in our memories, in our conversations. And I was also afraid it would kind of send me back into the spiral of kind of horrible depression. And it didn't do that. It sent me into grief, which was appropriate, but not into complete, lack of hope about everything. It was interesting and horrible and unavoidable and survivable, I suppose.
I'm so glad you made that distinction, because I wanted to ask if you were fearful of being sent back into that 4-year period of depression that you had in the early 2000s. What was the difference between that and the grief that you felt after losing your dad?
I mean, the grief that I felt after losing Dad it's natural. It's horrible, but it's something I could make sense. Well, not really make sense of, because I want to know where he is still. But I know it happens to everyone, no matter what our relationship with our parents are, that we all lose that person. Whereas when I was in that awful breakdown of those years, I've no idea, even now, what generated it. And it was much, much, much worse than grief, because, I did feel like the world had tilted when Dad died. But when I was in that awful time of, I don't know, rickety mental health, whatever, I felt disconnected from everyone. Like I knew that I had once loved them. I was dead to love, yeah. Whereas grief is kind of all about love. And I was frightened all the time during the bad years. And I mean, I was actually frightened some of the time after Dad died. But also, after Dad died, it was a shared experience, the grief. It wasn't just me who had lost somebody. I felt, it was the isolation and the lack of connection of the acute depression that made it so hard to endure. That might be the difference.
You're one of 5. You're the eldest. So what's it like grieving for a parent? They talk about the circles of grief and who the chief mourner is, obviously your mother, Marian Keyes. And then in that next circle is the 5 of you. How did the family dynamic play out during that time? Because I imagine perhaps people grieved in different ways.
They absolutely did, Mia. I mean, it was very interesting, which is a kind of a weird word to use. But yeah, because we all had a different parent with him. Our relationship with him was unique. And there were some who felt that they'd lost their ally. Others who felt they'd lost their rock. Others who felt they'd lost almost their equal. And others like me who I felt in a way that as the eldest, it was sort of my duty to step into the empty space. It was really fascinating because I hadn't gone through something like that before. But yeah, the 5 of us, and some of us became sort of encapsulated in ourselves and kind of almost took a step back from the family. And others, well, my mother really, really wanted us around all the time. It was almost like she needed to be sure that we were all still there. And actually, I've just remembered something. I kept expecting other people to die. That was my response. But I believe it's a fairly common one. And even in the middle of the night, I'd wake up and check that Tony, my husband, was still breathing. I was so afraid to touch him sometimes in case he was cold. Because once you know that loss is happenable, possible, you just see, well, I saw death, the possibility of it.
Everywhere.
I can hear the shock in your voice that it happened and still the disbelief that he died, even though you would think that, but you knew it was coming. And I've heard people say it was not a surprise, but it was a shock.
That's exactly it. I knew it was going to happen, but still I couldn't believe it. And to see him not there, even at his worst with the Alzheimer's, he was, I don't know, there was a sweetness in him. And then there was nothing. there are no words. I mean, there are no words. You know, human beings, it's just the oddest thing because we're not able to comprehend it.
As a writer, did you want to write your way through processing it?
I didn't, Mia. I couldn't. Like for 6 months, it was like after getting a dead arm to the brain. Like I couldn't write. I didn't write for 6 months, and I was meant to have delivered grown-ups. I couldn't. Like my brain had stopped functioning. I remember being tired all the time and having to miss out on family events because I was just exhausted by crowds and noise.
I was going to ask if you ever get scared when you can't write that you'll never be able to write again.
Always, Mia, always. Yeah, because I think anything truly kind of inspirational comes from the subconscious. You know, it's not a decision I make with my top head, if you know what I mean. It's not something I can just decide, like deciding to drive my car. When I have nothing, no words or no story, no people in my head, I think, that's it, right? I'll have to go back and retrain.
What does it feel like when it comes back? Does it come back slowly or does it just come back like an orgasm?
Not exactly an orgasm, but suddenly I find myself thinking about an imaginary person and their world. And it's exciting. And it's like, I don't know, finding something small and shiny on the ground and not really knowing what it is, but thinking, oh God, this is precious and I'm going to hold on to it and I'll find out what it is. Yeah, and it usually builds slowly. Although sometimes, you know, with grown-ups actually, that came in one idea of like, you know, a family dinner with somebody who had concussion and they're spilling all the secrets of the family. Mostly it's a slow process, but I'm always so grateful and happy because, you know, I've always sidestepped the painful aspects of the world via fiction because I started reading really young. Books still. Oh, I'd forgotten another thing. I couldn't read during the
grief.
Yeah, that was awful.
So what did you do if you couldn't read?
I watched a lot of TV and I started painting pictures. I mean, they're crap. Like they're absolutely awful, but it didn't matter because it was another form of creativity because the words were gone. So I used color. I always thought I'd love to do oil paintings. So I went to see if I could get lessons. And the teachers were all, oil paint. Nobody starts with oil paintings. We have to do watercolors first. Small little sappy watercolors. And I thought, no, feck this. So I went out and I bought like enormous canvases, you know, like 200 meters long and 200 centimeters long. And I really need to remember my decimal points. And 150 meters wide. And I just bought like massive tubes of oil paints and just like squeezed them, you know, all over, like in colors I loved. That helped, you know.
Marian, the plasticity of your creativity is astonishing and beautiful because when you had your depressive episode, it was baking that was your creative expression because you couldn't write then either, could you? But you could bake.
I could bake. And what I loved most about that, the baking part, was decorating the cakes.
Yes.
Like that became more important than the cake bit of the cake. And then in more recent times, I went to a small crazed fit of knitting and made these really colourful cardigans for as many people as I could force them on. And at the moment, I've just moved into a new house. I am drowning in fabric swatches. You know, like when I'm not doing the words, I like to be working with colour of some sort.
In your clothes, in your furnishings, your Etsy cushions. You've got a beautiful wall behind you. Of course.
I mean, my God,
your shoes.
am addicted to Etsy, like addicted at the moment, like it's Swedish tapestries or Swedish cushions, like vintage Swedish thing or Norwegian, you know, cushions that actual Norwegian women made in the long agos. I mean, I say long agos, I mean probably the 80s. It gives me such pleasure. And, you know, they're fairly benign addictions, I suppose. You know, I'm not going to bankrupt myself.
Yeah.
Well, I might, because I can do nothing by halves. If I like something, I never just like it. I adore it. I fucking love it. Like, it's like, you know, then it moves through me like a storm and it's gone. And I'm maybe ready to start writing again
Yes.
But I can only do one thing at a time.
The one addiction that didn't move through you was alcohol, right?
It moved through me in a horrible way and kind of hung around for a long time at its worst phase.
You went to rehab when you were 30, and I remember you've said, it didn't occur to me that I was an alcoholic. I thought I had depression, and I was quite shocked to learn that I was an alcoholic when I got to rehab. What did you think you were going to rehab for if it wasn't alcoholism?
I thought, well, obviously I wasn't an alcoholic because I was a woman and I was 30 and I had a home and I had a job and I had nice shoes and stuff like that. I just thought it could never happen to me. But I did think that my depression was making me act out, although we didn't even know that word back then. Because of my depression, I drank a little too much. But I would go to this place and everyone who was pissed off with me, who was everyone.
Why were they pissed off with you? Who was pissed off with you?
My flatmates, my work colleagues, my friends, because I was drunk all the time and not going to work and sad all the time and unreliable and talking about killing myself. And they were also telling me that I was an alcoholic and that I had to stop drinking. And I thought, well, obviously I won't stop drinking because there's no need. They're overreacting. But they'll see I've made an effort. They won't be cross with me anymore. Meanwhile, while I'm in this place, they'll sort me out. They'll fix whatever is wrong with me. And then I can come back and I can drink normally and everything will be lovely. That's sincerely what I thought. You know the way they say that alcoholics or addicts of any kind are in denial. And I think people don't really believe it, but it's true. I honestly didn't think I was. I felt I didn't fit the mold. And yeah, I mean, another aspect of addiction is terminal uniqueness. And I was terminally unique.
What do you mean by that?
There's nobody as tormented as me, as misfortunate as me, as unappreciated in the world as me, as wounded as me. And of course I had to drink because all these things were my unique burdens. But I found out that I wasn't unique and that the way I drank and the way I justified it were absolutely par for the course, just textbook. It was an awful shock.
How did you come out of that denial? What made you realize,
hearing other people's stories. I mean, that's the whole thing about addiction is discovering that, yeah, oh God, I'm not unique. I am the same as all these other people. And they're addicts or alcoholics. So if they are, I must be. And then I think just being away from the world and getting an overview of my life from a distance and seeing that, like, every time I drank, something bad didn't always happen, but every time something bad happened, it was because of alcohol. And then towards the end, I mean, every time I drank, something bad happened.
Like what kind of bad thing?
You know, not remembering how I got home or having rows with people, you know, falling out with people, saying inappropriate things that I didn't even remember saying, you know, leaving my shoes in a taxi, but not knowing what taxi it was, never having any money. That was part of it. And nothing kind of disastrous ever happened. But it was like one long list of painful, shameful things. I didn't want to do that anymore. It was interesting how quickly the change came. I just thought I deserve better or I want better. And life isn't going to give me better. I have to make it better. Yeah, I suppose one of the great things about that realization was that I saw that it was up to me. That, like, I couldn't keep waiting for the universe to deliver for me. I had to do it. I had to stay away from one drink one day at a time. And that's what I've done, like with an awful lot of help which I was willing to accept finally. Until that point, I was very much, I'll do it on my own. And I couldn't do it on my own.
30 years later, is it still one day at a time?
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like it's a struggle and it's not. I mean, it's absolutely not. I mean, I do what I'm supposed to do. I do the right things. I take care of myself. And once I do them, I don't have to think about it. I mean, I never think about alcohol. What I do is I think about keeping myself safe from, I mean, I can't avoid stress. I can't avoid pain. But it's about finding other ways to manage it. And it becomes a habit. Like, it's easy, isn't, I mean, it is easy. It is easy. It has become habitual. And I never, ever, ever miss it. And, I'd really like to say that to anyone who was, worried about their drinking or thinking, oh my God, it's the only good thing in my life. For me, it was the love of my life. And I thought I wouldn't survive without it. And now, 30 years later, I have had an entire lifetime without it. And I've survived so much of life, good and bad, without having to drink. So it's really possible if you accept the help and if you keep it small. None of us have to live our entire rest of our life today. All we have to do is this moment, then the moment after it, and then the one after that.
When you're going through difficult times, do you have to be particularly vigilant?
Yeah, I do. Because, I will never not be an alcoholic. It was my go-to response for the unpleasantness of life for a long time. And I don't want to go back there. So I stay close to other recovering alcoholics. I'm more aware of things like needing alone time, needing to not be around toxicity in whatever form, to stay with people who I feel safe with. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Are there other ways that you can block your feelings now? Because whether it's food or gambling or drugs or alcohol, an addiction for many people is just about numbing out, about blocking your feelings.
Yeah.
I mean, you white-knuckled through grief, you white-knuckled through the pandemic, or maybe it wasn't white-knuckling, maybe it was just...
Yeah, I don't feel like I white-knuckled through grief at all. I mean, I felt it. It was painful. But at no point would alcohol have been...
not even a respite.
No. I mean, I think of it now and I literally think of it as poison. Even if I accidentally catch a whiff of somebody's wine, it makes me feel sick. The pandemic was tough, but no way did I want to drink. And maybe it comes back to those healthy addictions. And I suppose one of the things I did through the pandemic was I wrote a book. And I mean, I know I do it anyway when we're not going through a pandemic. I was very grateful to have that book. It was, again, Rachel, I'd started it just before we went into lockdown. And it was such a friend to me. Like, it was really there for me. It took me away from the tedium and the fear. Everybody found the lockdown and pandemic hard. And I feel luckier than most that the job I had involved stepping into a different reality.
You were so smart to identify, because there was a period in lockdown where you felt that you couldn't write. Again, it left you briefly, didn't it?
It did at the beginning.
How long did it take you to work out why that was and what brought it back?
Yeah, for about the first 6 weeks, when we really thought it was going to be like 2 months, 6 weeks. Yeah, I couldn't write. And I will tell you why. There is a reason for this. It's a survival technique for humans, because we were all so scared. We couldn't give any part of our brain over to imagining or dreaming. We had to be utterly vigilant the entire time. We were doing that thing of scanning the horizon for danger. So we had to be fully present in our bodies. And that's why, I don't know if anyone even remembers now, but at the start of the pandemic, we were all having incredibly vivid dreams because we couldn't do that in the daytime. So the part of ourselves that needs that was done when we were asleep. And then, I don't know, then when it dawned on me, fuck it, this is for the long haul.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't realize how long the haul was going to be. But yeah, then I was able to step into that world and use it as what do they call it? A resource. So fairly quickly.
Rachel, again, was, I just absolutely adored it. That idea of revisiting characters, which, through your 17 books is my favourite mistake.
16 novels.
16 novels.
Thanks.
You've revisited a lot of characters, the beautiful Welsh family, which I feel like I'm a part of, as so many millions of people do. You spend time with your characters. You talked about like noticing them on the ground and picking them up. What do you do with them when you've finished with them, when the book is over? Is there like a waiting room or a storage area in your brain where they all hang out until you decide that you might revisit them again and spend time with them?
That's such an interesting question. I think by the end of any of my books, people are in a good enough place. They're free to go off and live their lives. I know this sounds ridiculous because they're imaginary. And I sort of feel fine about kind of opening the window and saying, fly, my pretty ones. But with the end of Again, Rachel, I was about to start writing another book. I had a whole other thing, an ambitious thing planned. And actually, I couldn't let them go because kind of around the time the pandemic kind of started to come to an end, Russia invaded Ukraine. And I thought, oh my God, and I was really scared. And just the world felt too frightening and too full of evil people, a small number of evil people affecting so many of us. So I decided I'd stay with the Walshes. Like, that's the first time that's ever happened, that I thought, okay, I needed them more than they needed me at that stage. That was like February 22. Yeah, so they kind of stayed with me then. God, and I was so grateful for them.
You've said that you'd planned something different. What did you plan to write?
A big sort of ambitious 40-year opus about 7 people who'd been friends in the 80s. And you know that thing about, people that you were friends with, oh, you're not old enough, but like 1,000 years ago, we all get stuck in our identities then. And we're all kind of in sibling rivalry with each other. And we're kind of watching and seeing like who's doing,
Yeah.
In any friendship group, there's going to be one person who kind of, seems to effortlessly make tons of money and kind of have this amazing life, and they kind of peel away from the rest of us, but they come back now and again just to make us feel shit about ourselves in the guise of, guys, you're my, never forget where you came from kind of business. And I realized that 2 of the people in this group had made a lot of money being bad, being evil. I thought, I cannot spend 2 years of my life, because that's how long it takes me to write a book, with these awful people who make the world worse. And I thought maybe I'll be more robust at some other stage to write about.
Can you put that story and those characters in the waiting room and just say, hey, go in there, I might get to you at another stage, or maybe not?
Yes, or maybe not. And at the moment, definitely not. It's funny because I had a plot and I had a location and I had kind of stories for each of the people, and it's still there.
Yeah.
And I may or may not use them, but at the moment, I'm still feeling the world is, it feels worse now, if anything.
Yeah, things aren't improving,
sorry,
Marian.
not meaning to harsh our mellows. I have a couple of ideas for other things, but they're different, and they're not Walshes either.
When that realization started to dawn on you, was there a part of you that it's like, I'm already down that road? Am I allowed to turn back? Should I turn back? How much time am I going to waste if I turn back? Should I just keep trying to push on? Was there just a moment or a day where you just went, no? And then was there a big feeling of relief?
That's exactly it. I just decided, I think, thank God, I hadn't actually started on the writing. I just started on the and the research and that. And I just thought, well, I'm really lucky in that my publishers let me kind of write what I need to write or what I want to write.
Well, you're not lucky. That's a ridiculous thing to say, Marian Keyes. You're not lucky. You're brilliant.
Oh, stop.
You write brilliant books and you're incredibly successful. So for your publishers to doubt your instincts would be crazy for them.
That's a really nice thing to say. I don't feel like that, though. I feel like I forget. I'm not putting it well. There's a part of me, and it's never gone away, that desire to sort of please, to be obliging and reliable and all of those things. And sort of changing my mind feels like something I should apologize for. It was quite sincerely, a self-protective thing. I knew I couldn't.
Yeah.
I knew I could. I should say that around the same time, I stopped reading hard news, stopped watching the news. Yep. And since then, I haven't started again. So, I know what's going on in the world, but only in a sort of a broad brush stroke way, because I'm not capable at the moment. There was a time when I felt I had to kind of keep abreast of absolutely everything terrible that was happening, that it was my duty as a responsible citizen and a person who cared about people. And now I realize that I simply don't have the resources right now. I may have again, but getting through the day without feeling just crippled and broken by sorrow is not an option right now. And it doesn't mean I don't care, because I do. but I cannot engage with it the way I used to.
There are so many bleak, tragic books. And I always feel the same way when someone goes, oh, I love this, I cried so much, or it was devastating, and I'm just like, why would you want to spend hours and hours of that?
Yes.
And I love that you have so unapologetically said, I'm writing a book that feels good. It feels good to write and it's going to feel good to read.
Thank you, Mia. Yeah, that's exactly what I decided because, I spent 2 years in a book and I thought, I just want to write about nice people in a beautiful place, falling in love, sorting out some of the unavoidable fuck-ups that we all make. I wanted to show that people can fall in love at any age. I wanted to write about community and family. I wanted to create a kind of a happy, fun, safe place. I wanted to bring my readers into this place with me and say, the only really bad things that happen in here are people misunderstanding each other.
Yeah.
People needing to apologize to each other. That in this world, anything bad that has happened, we can attempt to remedy it. It is within our power. We are not completely without power or hope in here. Yeah, it was a deliberate decision because another thing, all I wanted to read was love stories. I mean, I so agree with you. I cannot read those books where people say, it'll break your heart.
Oh.
No, please. No, my heart is already broken. No more. Thanks a million. Could we have laughter? Could we have people being kind at all?
After the break, there was something that Marian said that just absolutely broke my heart. I found it so incredibly poignant. It was about not having children, but she said it in a way that really surprised me because she really wanted to have children. She and her husband really did, and they didn't. And now she's 60. Stay with us. More Marian in a minute. You recently moved house and you turned 60.
Yeah.
I read an interview with you where the interviewer came to visit you in your house the day before you were moving. And you said to her, we've lived here 27 years, but we knew this wasn't going to be our forever house because we bought this as a family home and we didn't have a family. Marian, that just poleaxed me, the way you said that, because it felt like a lot, like there was a lot of depth underneath those words.
Yeah, I mean, I would have loved children. In my wildest imaginings, I would have loved 6. I know that's insane. I know. And
well, you're Irish. It's not insane. And you're one of 5. That's like a pretty small family, really.
Yeah, it is. And my husband is such a beautiful man. Like, he's so patient and kind. He would have made a lovely dad, and it was such a loss. It was an entire other life. I've said this often, like I spent, all my 20s trying not to get pregnant. And then, most of my 30s trying to get pregnant. I have to say this. I'm okay now. I've been okay for a good while. I was so lucky in that I got given acceptance because, I'm not good when I don't get what I want. I don't think any of us are really. And I just had this picture of me and him and I suppose being the eldest of 5, I'm so interested in how every person from the same gene pool is unique. How people come out so different. Okay, it didn't happen. We eventually made our peace with it. And I made a deliberate decision to not be bitter.
How?
Well, I looked at what I had been, I was sober. The fact that I did not drink, it means that everything good is still possible. And I'm not going to get what I want all the time. But I had been given so much. I'd been given freedom from the compulsion to drink. I'd met this wonderful person who I love so much and who loves me. I have healthy relationships when I had had none. I have my siblings and then their children. I have this beautiful career where I can write about sometimes my own pain and that it can connect me to other people. I decided rather than living a life where I'm fixated on what I haven't got, it would be worth my while to try and focus on the life and all the good things I have got.
Mm.
But it was a decision, like it was an absolute decision. And I had to ask, I have a very weird relationship with, the universe or whatever. But I asked the universe to help me accept it. And I did get the help to accept it. And both me and my husband, we have a lot of kids in our life.
Mm.
And we get to spend a lot of time with them. And, we get so much. I can't tell you the delight and the joy. Like in Ireland, we've got nieces and nephews aged between nearly 24 and 4. And like, we have relationships with all of them. And my siblings are very kind, like we're allowed to have goes of them fairly often. And like with the eldest two who are, 24 and nearly 23, we have relationships with them as sort of adults. So we got what we got because that's it. You get what you get.
Mm.
And my attitude, Tony is a far more Zen person than I am. But I decided that I would not be bitter, as I said, and no, I'm not going to use that word because listen, there are people who are in this pain and everybody is different. I'm only saying what I did, and that like, I know it is such a sorrow.
But I think it will be a great comfort to know that it is possible to come out the other side, because I've heard of a lot of women who have the trouble with reproductive technology. Well, it's not a trouble, but it used to be that once you accepted it and you got to a certain age, people stopped asking you. But now that people can have via donor eggs, and so you might accept it, but was everyone else like, oh, you could still adopt, you could still do this, you could still get a surrogate, you could still do donor eggs? Did you have to sort of tell other people to sort of back off and just leave you be?
Not really. No.
So everyone was accepted it with you?
Yeah, they did. And we had made a decision to stop. We didn't do IVF because I just felt, this sounds weird, but I felt like it was almost like being ungrateful to the universe. And this is just for me.
Yeah.
I know people who've had children from IVF and they're so happy and it's wonderful. And everybody has to do what is right for them. But I just mean that like for me, I was afraid of tempting fate. I felt like I've been so lucky. I've come from such a terrible place to such a good one. There's a place and a time that's appropriate to stop. And this is just for me. And for anyone else who's going through this, I feel your pain and do what you need to do for you.
I watched you on Instagram the other day with numbing cream all over your chin where you were about to get fillers. You started getting Botox for the first time at 52. Same. I got it maybe when I was 51. That was when I got it for the first time. I'm quite tortured about it. I was tortured about it all the way. I wanted to be that person who just got it once, but I wasn't.
Yeah.
Tell me about your relationship with Botox and fillers.
Same. Tortured. On the one hand, like I really feel that by me getting Botox and fillers is almost like, it's doing a disservice to all women because it's changing what women are meant to look like.
What 60 looks like, because you're 60 now.
I am 60, okay. And like, I feel shitty about it because I feel there are women who can't afford it. And also I feel like an absolute shill of the patriarchy because, this is me absolutely buying into the thing that women are meant to look young and skinny and beautiful and unblemished and all those things that like caused me such torment for so many years. And then on the other hand, I feel I've internalized that so much. Like it's really, really, really hard to deprogram myself from all of those messages that like, oh my God, you cannot be a crone. I would love to be a crone.
Yeah.
I wish I had enough of a sense of self to not have Botox, to not have fillers. I feel apologetic to all women. I feel like I've let us all down by getting it. And I am sad and disappointed with myself that I am not courageous enough to subvert those expectations. And then I also think I am me and I am allowed to look whatever way I like. But I do think, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't.
I was worried when I went over that it would be a slippery slope and I'd end up, I'll just do this and I'll just do this, I'll just do this. Like
the bride of Wildenstein or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we've talked about your addictive nature and mine. Do you have lines in the sand for yourself?
I've loads of lines in the sand. Yeah, there's loads of things I wouldn't do. I mean, anything that causes pain.
Isn't filler painful? Where do you get filler?
Where do I get filler? Hang on till I remember now.
No, I don't mean the venue. I mean, where in your face do you get filler?
No, yeah. I mean, different places at different times, usually around here,
Those labial-nasal folds around your mouth. Yeah.
I don't find them painful. But like there's all these other things, all therapy and something called the vampire facial, something called the Morpheus thing, or there's lasery things that are meant to be like excruciating. Yeah, the pain puts me off. And then the thought of actual surgery scares the bejesus out of me.
Like a facelift, yeah.
Yeah, because I think anything permanent terrifies me because I'd be afraid of it going wrong. But who knows? I mean, for a long time I was super judgy. I was I'll never, ever have injectables. And then,
look at us go.
The time came and I changed my mind. So like, I can't say that there are no lines in the sand, even though for me now there aren't.
Menopause is a theme in My Favourite Mistake, one of the themes, and HRT. How was the menopause for you?
It was horrific. Perimenopause started for me around the same time I had the acute depressive episode, as the doctors called it.
Was it related, Marian?
I think it must have been, but nobody said it. I mean, this was 15 years ago. It literally landed on me like a meteorite. Like one afternoon, I was in somebody's back garden and it was like a lovely thing. Out of nowhere, this appalling anxiety came on me and it stayed for a long, long, long time. And like it could have been 2 or 3 years. Somebody said, do you think it could be hormonal? And so I did a test and apparently I was, very low in estrogen. And progesterone. But then it took a long time for the hormones to be...
Yeah, it's like a roller coaster. They completely fluctuate, like reverse puberty, they say it's like.
Yeah, like I felt so depressed and so anxious and so afraid. And I mean, I honestly don't know what was going on, but it does occur to me that could easily have been part. But then once the doses were right, it was like, I don't know, it was like a rebirth. The anxiety stopped, the optimism returned, the hot sweats stopped. The rage comes and goes, I must admit.
Yes.
I actually kind of like the rage because it's appropriate rage.
Yeah.
I am at my angriest, either behind the wheel of a car with men or in the gym with men. They are so fucking noisy. Why must they be so grunty and noisy?
Well, they say estrogen is the people-pleasing hormone. So we're conditioned to people please. And then when it drops, that's when we start complaining about things. We become grumpy old women because it's just like, well, fuck you. Stop grunting.
Yeah.
You're annoying.
Yes. Would you please keep your disgusting noises to yourself? And yeah, like Anna in My Favourite Mistake, like she stops giving lengthy explanations. Like in the book, she wants to change hotel rooms. And she doesn't kind of start with like, I'm really sorry and the room was gorgeous. And if you wouldn't mind, it's just that I need my sleep and it's over the bottle bank. She's like, yeah, it's over the bottle banks. And that's all the information she's given, Give me a proper room that doesn't wake me in the middle of the night with people flinging bottles.
It's quite liberating, isn't it?
Liberating, yes. That we don't have to kind of write War and Peace every time we need something. But I have had people who did not want to give me HRT. And honest to God, I feel like it saved my life. And there's another thing. This is a statistic that I only learned fairly recently. Women are more likely to kill themselves between the ages of 45 and 55 than any other age.
And get divorced.
Oh, and get divorced. Go on.
Yeah.
Right.
Same.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's obviously connected. And I like that it has become okay to talk about it, because like even in My Favourite Mistake, Anna mentions the menopause, and a younger woman, Courtney, you know, she kind of blesses herself practically when you hear the word said out loud. It's like, you know, don't invite the evil spirits in. And it's like 50% of the population go through it. And it is like adolescence in reverse, like the confusion, the change in your body, the not knowing yourself.
The identity at a time when the world tells you you're invisible and your body's changing shape.
Yes.
It's really tricky.
And you know that you are worth so much. You know that you have wisdom that these young uns don't. It's infuriating.
You know, Marian has been married to her husband, Tony, who she often refers to as himself. Is that an Irish thing? Maybe it is. I met Tony. He's very handsome, or very fit, as she would say, 7 years ago when she came into the Mamamia office. And I was interested to ask her whether Tony had ever known her when she was an alcoholic before she got sober. I also wanted to know about the absolute hardest points in their marriage. And she tells me after this. Marian, I want to ask you about marriage and about himself. You've been married for about 30 years. He knew you before you went into rehab, didn't he?
Yeah.
Were you together then?
No, we weren't, but I knew him. And I'm really glad that we knew each other then, because he knows the worst me. He knows all the me's. You know, he knew the drinking me, the shambolic me, you know, the messy me. I mean, I feel incredibly lucky, but I feel like I married somebody who liked me. And prior to that, I had no interest in somebody liking me or admiring me. I just thought it was all about rolls eyes, passion, you know, and drama and rows and slamming doors and misunderstandings and passionate makeups. And marriage is a relationship just like any other relationship. Why would you be friends with someone who was mean to you? Like, isn't it far better to be friends with someone who's kind to you, like someone who's on your side and wants the best for you, and somebody that you feel protective of rather than afraid of or full of crazed yearning for? I've learned so much about relationships from him. Like, he is a kind man. The whole love language thing, I didn't understand any of that. And like, I realized that, I mean, I have all kinds of love languages. I need to be shown I'm loved in all kinds of ways. And like, he's kind of an active services person, you know.
What's your love language?
My love language. I'm very affectionate, and I tell people I love them a lot. Oh God, this is dreadful. I mean, I give things away. You know, if somebody says they like something of mine, I will take it off my back and give it to them. I don't know, I feel like we're only channels. That's kind of what I do, I think. But I'm very vocal about it. I think if we love people, they should know. They need to be told. What's the point of loving people? And if they don't know, that's me. But I'm quite effusive. It comes back to that thing of earlier. Like, I can't do anything by halves. If I like somebody, I adore them. And they need to be told.
What's the bleakest time or the toughest time in your marriage?
It was when I was really not well and I couldn't connect. I couldn't have human connection. He couldn't reach me and I couldn't feel anything. I knew I loved him in my head, but I couldn't feel it in me. And so we lived parallel lives for a lot of that time. And I was so worried about feeling responsible for him. I didn't want to feel I couldn't take care of him. And he found resources in himself. He did things that he had wanted to do that he hadn't done up to that point. And I respect him so much that like he took care of himself in that time. He leaned into parts of his identity that he hadn't fully explored, you know, and he had always wanted to kind of climb mountains and stuff like that. And he did that and he still does that. That's his
self-expression and creativity
passion.
In a way. Yeah,
it is. Yeah.
And identity. And that must have felt like a relief in a way, because in some ways it's counterintuitive. You were so unwell, but he could have easily fallen into becoming your caretaker and the relationship could have swung way out of balance. But instead, he went and took care of himself so you didn't have to. You could just focus on taking care of you.
That's exactly it, Mia. Yeah, it is.
How has marriage changed for you? like now? How do you keep the passion alive, Marian? Because you still clearly fancy the pants off each other.
But you've got to do it. Like, you've got to make time for each other. I mean, I suppose realizing, like, we're not the same people. Having to kind of change with the person, or noticing how they have changed, and talking about it. It's about communication. You know, that, like, I thought if I got married, it would just kind of be delicious and lovely and just kind of a steady home the whole way through. It hasn't. We talk, like, we still talk. I'll make him. I'll sit him down and say, come on. I mean, we joke about it. I say, it's time for us to reconnect. And he's like, oh, Christ. But, like, when people say they have to work at it, I never really knew what they meant, but it's things like that. And taking an interest. Oh, yeah, another thing, right? Just a small thing. When he comes back from being up a mountain and he's got taken photographs on his phone and he comes to show them to me, I kind of put down whatever I'm doing and I turn and give him my full attention, rather than kind of, that kind of half kind of, because he's only asking for like 4 minutes of my time.
Do you know what I found most interesting about that interview? I mean, all of it. I just want to curl up in the warm Irish bosom of Marian Keyes and live there for my whole life, because it feels like it would be very safe. I found it interesting, the calmness with which she faced each of those 3 moments where she couldn't write anymore, and how her creativity, which is clearly so strong, just came out a different way, whether it was decorating cakes or painting. I thought that was really, really interesting. It's so innate and it's got to get out somehow. And aren't we the luckier for it that usually it comes out via her beautiful books? I'm so glad that she wrote this book. I have saved it. I told her that I hadn't read it, and that's always embarrassing. I don't like to ever interview authors before I've read their books. But I said to her that I was going on holiday and I'd saved it as my little treat. Well, it's my big treat because it's a big book. That's what I'm doing. I usually take a Kindle on holidays because I like to put clothes in my suitcase in every spare centimetre. But I love her so much, I'm actually taking up room in my suitcase with a very big Marian Keyes book. My favourite mistake is amazing. We'll put links to that in the show notes. Another fun fact, if anyone's still listening, because I know I'm rambling, but sometimes I just like to debrief with you after an interview. My cousin, Emil Sherman, is a producer, and he is producing Marian's book, Grown Ups, making it into a Netflix series. So how's that? So maybe I will go on set and I find sets so boring. I even find the set of Strife boring, and that's my show I'm a producer of. I shouldn't say that. It's amazing. I love it. I love everything. It's just that it's slow. When you make a book into a TV show or a movie, it's very slow and there's a lot of people involved. What Marian does, it's just her, which is scary in many ways because everything depends on her. And when the writing inspiration leaves her and she can't write, well, there's no one else to pick up the slack. Like, no one else can kind of fill in for her. So I guess that's a good thing about making things into movies and TV shows and stuff. But the creative process of that, there's just a lot more people involved. So, the author is a bit more at arm's length. Anyway, read my favourite mistake. I plan to. I love you. I'll see you next week. If you've got any feedback about the show, do you know what would really help? If you enjoyed this interview, can you do me a big solid and leave a review? If you didn't like it, just don't worry. But if you did, can you go to wherever you're listening to this podcast? Just do it now. I'll wait. Or I might go and make a cup of tea. But go and say a nice thing because this really, really helps. You got this in your ears for free. Hopefully it was a lovely experience. So what you could do to say thanks if you wanted to is to just go to the show, make sure you're subscribed, obviously, leave a nice review. 5 stars would be good. I'm just saying. Lots of love. I'll be back in your ears if I ever turn off the microphone next week. Bye.